It's the Musicalist for Friday, August 15th. I'm Phil Oliver, and today I'm talking with composer Frank Ticheli. Ticheli is an alum of the University of Michigan, where he studied with William Bolcom and Leslie Bassett. He's currently a professor of composition at the University of Southern California's Thornton School of Music, a post he's held for a little over 2 decades. In July of 2010, the American premiere of Ticheli's Clarinet Concerto took place in Texas, with soloist Håkan Rosengren performing with the Round Top Festival Orchestra and conductor Joanne Falletta. Next month, a new recording of that work, this time with wind ensemble, will be released featuring soloist Nathan Williams and the University of Texas Wind Ensemble with Jerry Junkin conducting. I wanted to start off by asking how your interest in the wind band developed. And I say developed just by way of assuming that a lot of composers, especially when they're first starting out, don't gravitate immediately to writing for the wind band.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, like so many American musicians, however, I grew up in public school, playing in public school bands and orchestras, so it's just a part of my early musical development. But you're right. When I was in college, especially in grad school at the University of Michigan, it was the last thing on my mind. I was writing chamber music and electronic music and vocal music and everything but orchestral music. Mm-hmm. For my doctoral dissertation, however, I just petitioned the committee with the request to write a wind ensemble piece instead of an orchestra piece for the dissertation. And they accepted that. And so I sort of, right at the very end, just sort of turned my attention in that direction. Of course, I went to the University of Michigan, which was a fabulous place with an amazing wind band program there, led by H. Robert Reynolds at the time. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of there in the culture of the school as well. And I wanted to try something for that medium, and I just found that I loved it. And it just brought back all those great memories of my earlier life playing in the ensembles. And so I sort of came at it almost at the very end of my formal training and just started writing more and more for it and really just almost fell into it right around that age, late 20s, early 30s, right in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had suspected that it would have had something to do with your being at the University of Michigan, obviously a place with such a strong tradition of wind ensemble music.
Indeed.
Alma mater of David Maslanka also, who also went on to sort of make his name writing for the wind band. Did you get any sort of pushback when you wanted to write a wind band piece for your dissertation, just because there's that stigma of the wind band as a purely pedagogical ensemble rather than something that can hold its own?
Yeah, not really, because, yes, it's got a pedagogical attachment, but it also had, and this is the late 80s at this time, there was also a small body of serious music written for the medium. Nothing like what we have today. Of course, it's grown hugely in the last couple of decades, so that just about every serious composer has written at least one piece for it now. But yeah, back then there was a small body of serious music, and so they accepted it. I do remember Leslie Bassett saying, but you can't just write just another wind ensemble piece. It has to be something special. Mm-hmm. So there was a little bit of that sort of expectation expressed to me that this has to be something special.
Yeah, I do want to come back to Leslie Bassett in a minute, but I mean, talking about this explosion of wind ensemble music within the last few decades, and you've contributed immensely to that. Do you ever have moments when you sort of begrudge the status of your wind ensemble music insofar as it could overshadow the rest of your catalog? Because, I mean, I'm thinking of works like Postcard or of your first symphony, which exist in both orchestral and concert band versions, and the same is true of a lot of your other pieces. So, I mean, personally, I became familiar with those two pieces in particular in their band versions before I even knew that they had been orchestral works.
Yes, and not only Postcard and the First Symphony, but my Clarinet Concerto and even Blue Shades and others. There are lots of works of mine that exist in both orchestral and wind ensemble versions, and the wind ensemble versions get far more performances. That's just the nature of the beast in a way, and they're just more. They're more hungry. They're more of them, and they're looking out for more new music. So no, I don't have a problem with that. I find that the two worlds don't really overlap that much. That is, that the orchestral world really doesn't care that I've written a lot of wind ensemble music, and many of them don't even know that I do. They don't know me on that side of me. Mm-hmm. And vice versa, the wind ensemble world doesn't really have much close contact with my orchestral music. So they are almost like two different hats that I wear. One hat is more active than the other. There's no question. You're right about that, and that's the wind ensemble side. Far more performances each year of my wind ensemble music than my orchestral. But I think that would be the case for just about anybody. There just aren't many composers who are getting more orchestral performances a year than they have fingers on their hands.
Right.
Unless you're John Adams. There are few, like John Adams and others. Mm-hmm. But most aren't. I don't have any kind of regrets about all of that at all. Do I wish there were more orchestral performances? Sure. I get maybe a half dozen a year. I wish there were a couple of dozen a year at least. Mm-hmm. But that's just where it is right now. And I'm thankful for the half dozen I get, actually.
Right. Well, I remember asking the same thing of David Maslanka. He's someone else who has written both orchestral and band music.
Yes.
Do you think there's just something inherent about the temperament of a wind player, or just the relative openness versus an orchestral player, or whoever happens to be calling the shots about repertoire in either of those spheres of performance?
I think it's more the latter, who's calling the shots more than the player. The players are, whether you're an oboist in an orchestra or a wind ensemble, I think there's more similarity there. You're an oboist, and except that the orchestras tend to be more professional. That's a big difference too. But it's more about the cultures. The orchestras are having to sell tickets. They are not going to be as open-minded to doing new music on every single concert because they've got tickets to sell and they're worried about their audiences. Whereas a wind ensemble, because it's not professional, it's in an academic setting, they're more apt to not only more fearless about doing it, but they actually are more excited about doing new music, far more excited about it. So it makes it a pretty exciting medium in that regard. It's far more adventurous these days, the wind ensemble, than it used to be, and far more adventurous than the orchestra is right now.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if the orchestra people couldn't possibly look at these wind ensembles and see that the audiences do in fact survive performances of new music, and that maybe they could translate that into implementing more new music on their programs. But there does seem to be this idea in the orchestral world that you have these fragile audiences and you have to sort of cater to what you think they want, which that's debatable and up for speculation. So
yes, I think you're right. Although there are some orchestras more adventurous than others. I mean, the LA Phil has traditionally been more adventurous than, say, some of the East Coast orchestras, and then you've got the Albany Symphony, you've got Boston Modern Orchestra Project, BMOP. Mm-hmm. So you've got those orchestras that are more adventurous, and in some cases are devoted exclusively to new music. So at least they're out there, and you've got conductors who are more adventurous than others, like Maren Alsop, for example. She does Cabrillo Festival, and she's just more adventurous than some other conductors who are out there. But I think you raise a good point that the wind ensemble could be upheld as a kind of a model in that regard, and I think some conductors have taken note of that. I know that some of the other, like ASCAP, for example, has taken note of that. The Performance Rights Organization, they've taken note that, wow, here's where living composers are earning their livelihood more and more. Not the orchestra, but the wind ensemble, and they've taken note of it. Frances Richards, I heard her say it in a speech, even in a public speech that she gave, how exciting the wind ensemble is these days.
Right, and she was one of the, she was the director of ASCAP, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Up until recently, yeah.
That's right.
You're listening to The Musicalist. My guest this week is composer Frank Ticheli. Well, speaking of conductors who are a little bit more adventurous, especially in terms of programming American music, Joanne Falletta, who we recently had on this program, she conducted the premiere of your Concerto for Clarinet and Orchestra with the
American premiere. The world premiere was in Lithuania, but she conducted the American premiere.
That was with the Round Top Festival Orchestra. Just about 4 years ago, a fantastic group and a fantastic soloist, Håkan Rosengren.
Håkan Rosengren.
Yeah. So I understand you have a peculiar story surrounding the beginnings of this concerto, and it involves, of all people, someone we mentioned earlier, Leslie Bassett, who was, of course, who's since retired from the composition faculty at U of M. Could you share that story for anyone who's not familiar with it?
So you know that story. There are actually a couple of stories around the first movement, but that particular one that's connected to Leslie Bassett had to do with a dream I had early on. I was just struggling with how to start the piece and what the DNA of the piece would be, and often when I struggle with things like that and sort of the stress increases to a level such that the subconscious mind sort of starts to take over and work out the problems that the conscious mind is too stressed out to work out. And so the subconscious mind works it out through dreams, and it was in a dream where Leslie Bassett appeared, my dear old teacher, and just said, "Frank, why don't you write just nonstop 16th notes?" And then this orchestra appeared out of the floor magically, and the clarinetist appeared as well, and he just started playing the 16th notes. And in the dream I said, "But he has to breathe, Professor Bassett. He has to breathe somewhere. You can't just have nonstop." And he says, "Well, pass them on." And so magically the 16ths passed from the soloist to the violinist, down to the cellos, back to the soloist, and sort of all around the room. And so I sort of woke up and felt like I had my piece from that whole dream. So it was a nice dream.
Yeah, I think it's just incredibly serendipitous because talking about clarinetists, if they know just one piece by Leslie Bassett, it's, of course, the soliloquies, those 4 pieces for solo clarinet. And if you take like the ending of the first movement of those pieces and then put it next to, say, the opening of Rhapsody in Blue, and then put those two next to the opening of your concerto, there's a very, very clear sense that there's a shared musical DNA there. And I'm sure that that's no accident on your part.
Indeed, you're absolutely right, and you're right about that piece of his. It's probably his most performed piece, those soliloquies. But it's funny you mentioned the Gershwin connection. That's another story that's less pleasant, and that is that I had to. I kind of wanted to quote the beginning of Rhapsody in Blue, that iconic clarinet opening, and finally got a hold of the representative for the estate of the Gershwins, but by this point I'd already written a piece, and at first they denied my request. They said, "While we appreciate that you would honor Mr. Gershwin, we ask that you please refrain from doing a direct quote." And so then I had to go back to the drawing board and sort of make it a paraphrase instead of a quote. And so the opening, as the sort of in between the opening, you've got this sort of little jazzy riff, and then in between the opening trill and then the final gliss up, as in the Gershwin, you've got this little riff that I put in. And fortunately for me, after lots and lots of weeks of waiting, they finally said, "Okay, you can do this." So what originally was planned to be a direct quote had to end up being a paraphrase, and then I still had to put on the score permission granted by the Gershwin estate. And,
wow.
So. And ironically, Gershwin didn't even write that opening. That was the clarinetist in the Paul Whiteman band said to Gershwin, "Look, I can do this," and he did the opening gliss, with the finger gliss.
Yeah.
And Gershwin said, "Great, let's leave that in." So that's the great irony, is that Gershwin didn't come up with it either.
Right. You have to wonder if the estate of that clarinetist would sue the Gershwin estate for using that nowadays, especially in today's legal climate around music and all that. But
indeed, it's crazy nowadays.
But I think it came off terrifically, though, just as a paraphrase, because it's similar enough that we're all in on the joke, but it's also different enough that you can say this is Frank Ticheli, not just a quotation from Gershwin.
Yeah, and that's the irony that this paraphrase, I think I agree with you. I think it's better than the direct quote would have been, because it does just that. People sort of go, "Hey, I think I know that." "Oh no, I don't." "Oh yes, I do." You kind of go back and forth. So ironically, it worked out just fine. So it's kind of serendipity there, I suppose.
Yeah. I have to mention that people can hear what I assume is one of the American premiere performances of the concerto on YouTube. And next month we can look forward to a version of the concerto for wind ensemble and solo clarinet. This is going to be on a recording by the University of Texas Wind Ensemble with Jerry Junkin, just a fantastic group. I'm really geeking out about this recording coming out. Were you involved at all in the recording process with that?
No, but I traveled there. They went on first this summer, early summer. They went on an around the world tour, and I went with them for part of that. They started out in Hawaii, and then to Asia, and then went on around to London, and then back around. So they never changed. They never turned back. They just kept going in the same direction on their tour. And I was with them in Japan and Hong Kong and Taiwan, and got to hear them a lot. So, and we rehearsed quite intensely during this whole world tour, and so I got to see the piece hear the piece evolve. And they got better and better with each performance. And the soloist, Nathan Williams, is just phenomenal. He's just a great player. So I'm really excited about this recording. There are several out there already. There's one by the University of Michigan. There's one by Hucken has recorded it as well with Cal State Fullerton, and it's fantastic, actually. It's sort of a sleeper. I mean, Cal State Fullerton Wind Ensemble. When you say that, it doesn't come to mind that this is a powerhouse, like the University of Michigan, and yet their recording is amazing. So I just love that. That again attests to just how great the wind ensembles are out there in this country now, and not just in sort of the big major music schools. They're all over the place, and unexpected places even.
Right, and I think that's sort of what contributes to the success of a lot of people who end up writing for wind ensemble, because you can see wind ensembles popping up just about everywhere, whereas it's just logistically harder to put together a 100-person symphony orchestra.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed.
I'm wondering, that reminds me of like when you're writing for, say, a high school ensemble, where you may not necessarily have the full instrumentation that you call for in the score. Does that affect how you end up thinking about doublings and sort of more logistical problems to make sure that the piece, as you've written it, can still come off, even if these sort of unpredictable elements may be missing, or not the personnel won't be exactly what you might have in mind?
Yes, well, that's a good question. Instrumentation is less the concern, because usually at the high school level, usually most of the instruments are, at least at the level I'm writing, the instruments are pretty much available. But yes, there are certain instruments where you can't necessarily count on players being able to handle a part. So certain instruments, like, for example, horns and oboes, some high school groups have really accomplished players and others won't. And so those two in particular, I find I have to cross cue in some other instruments. So maybe an oboe passage, I might put it in the muted trumpet as a cue, just in case. And the horn, maybe I'll cue it off in a low trumpet or an alto sax or even the clarinet family, or euphonium if it's a low enough passage for the horn. So you do have to do that kind of thing. But the bigger issue is just that you can't, when you're writing for younger players, I mean, their lungs aren't as developed yet. Their fingers aren't as developed yet. A lot of issues like that you have to be careful about. And so those restrictions create problems. But what I find is that those problems lead me down pathways that sometimes are more imaginative than if I didn't have those problems. In other words, sometimes there's an imaginative solution that exceeds my own imagination without the problem. And so I actually find sometimes it's something to celebrate writing for kids. Those restrictions often free you up. Stravinsky once said that as well. He liked having lots of restrictions with restrictions, he found freedom. And I understand that completely, having written for so many decades now for young players, exactly what he meant by that. Having restrictions forces you to make decisions you wouldn't otherwise even bother with.
Right. Because I think about that so much because, like, with my high school band experience, I went to a public school. We didn't really have a well-funded music department like a lot of the school districts nearby. So there was that problem. Also, just of a general skill level was not where it normally is for a typical high school band. So as far as me becoming aware of your music, that really didn't happen until the end of high school for me, when I would... after school, it just so happened that this university nearby was starting their band rehearsals after I got out of school. So I just asked them if I could sit in the trombone section and play, and they let me. And yeah, we had one of your pieces on a program once, and that's sort of when I first became aware of your music, because I don't think we could have pulled off any of your band music in my high school band. It just wasn't quite at that level.
Yeah, that's great. Well, my high school experience was just the opposite. I grew up in one of those powerhouse Texas band programs, so I kind of had to learn the other side. I had to learn that as a composer, I had to learn, no, you can't necessarily just do this and that, because not every high school band has the kind of experience that yours had. So I had to sort of learn to back off and be careful.
Yeah. I'm always amazed, just looking over your schedule, how you find the time not only to write your music, but also to appear at universities and high schools and do clinics and coachings. And you also do quite a bit of conducting of your own music and other people's music. And that's sort of been your routine more or less since at least the 90s, I would say.
Yes.
Is that kind of... Is there a...
And I'm a full-time professor, and I'm a father of two. Life is just very busy. But
yeah, let's not forget that.
It's such a... It's certainly better than the alternative. So I'm actually grateful for it. Yes, you have to be careful. You have to balance your time. You have to carefully prioritize your life. I don't take just any invitation. I'm really careful about what I accept, about the guest invitations I accept. And so I spread them out and do just the ones that I think I'll enjoy and where I feel I can contribute something positive. So I enjoy it, and I find that because the energy is so much different from composing, the energy of conducting, which is it's like a circular energy, and that you're giving, but then the players are giving back to you. That's completely different from composing, where the energy's all going one way, or at least it feels that way. In a sense, yes, the piece does eventually start to give back and suggest to you where it wants to go, but most of the energy is one way, and the dynamic is so different as well. When you're composing, you're by yourself for hours and hours a day, whereas when you're conducting, you're with people all the time. So I love the balance of these two hats. Again, I'm using that analogy, the hat of a composer and the hat of a conductor. I find that they play off each other. Each area benefits from the other, and it just helps me it keeps it interesting for me and keeps it alive for me. So I'm kind of glad that I get to do both of those.
Right,
those
and
activities.
It's not every composer who can adapt to both circles of activity. Like we can think of so many composers who tended to be more on the reclusive side, and then there were other composers who were just able to do it all. Like, Leonard Bernstein was very much a public figure, very gregarious and out there, and also was able to sort of focus his energies in that. Because, composing isn't a social activity, so you're by yourself a lot of the time. So it seems like there's this kind of cross-training element to all of this, where the teaching fuels the composing and vice versa, and all of these activities sort of fuel each other somehow.
Yes, and I'm just grateful I can do both, and I'm aware that not all composers can and are even, for whatever reason, some of the greatest composers are some of the worst conductors. And being good at both doesn't necessarily mean you're somehow better than them. It just means you have that, whatever that is inside that makes you okay at both, and I just happen to be able to do both. And I'm really grateful for it, because I just find so much joy balancing the two, doing both of them. I do remember, though, Bernstein once saying how he wished the conducting weren't so dominant in his life. He wanted to do more composing, and he just felt like he didn't have enough time to compose. And I certainly can understand that. I feel that from time to time, especially as the year, at certain times of the year, like in the spring, when I'm at when there's so many demands on me in the spring, and I can't find enough time to compose. Mm-hmm. But in general, I love having the two worlds interact with each other.
Is the summer more or less reserved for composing, since you do have an academic position to commit to during the school year? Yes, but I also have lots of guest engagements in the summer. I mean, I just got back from that world tour with UT, and then I also did a trip in England, and I've done a few engagements here in the summer, and so it still happens. It's just that I don't have the teaching. I still have the composing and the guest conducting, but not the teaching. Mm-hmm. So it does feel a little bit more luxurious in the summertime. You actually have a premiere coming up early next year in February. The piece is called Dancing on Water. It's for wind ensemble, and the premiere performance is going to be Richard Floyd with the Austin Symphonic Band. And I just wanted to sort of let you talk about it a little bit, since obviously I haven't heard it, since there's no recording I can really refer to. So could you just talk about the process of writing this piece,
sure.
as much or as little?
I haven't heard it yet myself, okay. Except in my inner ear, and I'm excited about it. It's 7 minutes long. The title is kind of a nod to Richard Floyd's love of sailing, and so that's where the title comes from, Dancing on Water. And Dick Floyd happens to be the brother of my high school band director, Bob Floyd, and he's a longtime dear friend and colleague of mine. And he's been conducting that group for 25 years now, and so this is commissioned in his honor, and in celebration of his 25 years as the director of this Austin Symphonic Band, which is a community band, and that's another wonderful American phenomenon. These community bands, which are all over the country, some of them quite good, and the Austin Symphonic Band is no exception. It's a really good group. So I felt free to write pretty much what I wanted because they're a pretty good band. Mm-hmm. And so it's a 7-minute piece with a very sort of bright Stravinsky and crisp energy to it. And yet there's a lyrical streak that runs through the whole thing as well. So it's basically it's a piece that is singing and dancing for 7 minutes all the way through. And I just feel like it's going to be one of my better works for the wind band, actually. I'm really excited about it. But who knows, maybe I just jinxed it by saying that, but I think it's going to be one of my better.
But do you know if there's going to be any recording that people can listen to from that performance or from any subsequent ones?
Probably, and it'll get recorded because, again, that world is so active. It'll be out on recordings within the next year easily because they're so active out there. It'll be all over the place.
You can learn more about Frank Ticheli and his music at the podcast website, themusicalist.net. While you're there, consider helping to keep interviews like this one coming to you every week by making a donation. Simply click the donate link at the top of the page. All amounts are welcome and very much appreciated. Also, be sure to subscribe via iTunes to make sure new episodes are automatically downloaded to your listening device. You've been listening to The Musicalist. Tune in next week when my guest will be world-renowned soprano Carol Farley. Until then, I'm Phil Oliver. Thanks for listening.